Welcome to What's Next for Your Family Business. This session is presented by Kreischer Miller and Barley and Snyder. Let's meet our panelists. Stephen Stagatis, Director, Audit and Accounting, Kreischer Miller. Rich Doherty, President, Lab Repco. Michelle Rondinelli, President, Kitchen Kettle Foods. And your moderator is John Reed, Partner, Barley Snyder. John, take it away.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 Dealmakers panel on What's Next for Your Family Business. I'm John Reed, moderator of today's panel. Operating a business always has challenges. Operating a family business has even more challenges when you put family dynamics in it. Also has some benefits. Today I'm pleased to say we have a group of panel members that have deep experience with the dynamics of family-controlled businesses. So with that said, let's meet the panel and hear who they are and a little about their company and them. Michelle, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you, John. Pleasure to be here today. So I'm Michelle Rondinelli. I am a co-owner and president of Kitchen Kettle Foods. And Kitchen Kettle is a village of about 40 shops and restaurants, all located in the heart of Amish country. My grandparents started the business back in 1954 in their garage, and we've been growing it ever since and hope to be able to continue to do that. Like I said, we are located in Amish country, but we're not your typical Amish attraction. We have everything from gourmet food stores that sell olive oil, wine, cheese, to furniture stores that sell locally made furniture and quilts. And then also some national brands that we throw in there too in our jewelry and clothing stores. So a nice mix of things for the different visitors that come to the area to see us. We have the main store is our anchor store where we manufacture the products, and people can come and watch Amish women make everything that we sell for the most part. And in a normal year, they get to sample about 100 different products in the store. That's not happening this year in COVID, but it's definitely part of the experience. We know as a company, we're not in the jelly business, we're in the experience business. So we spend a lot of time focusing on that experience and how we create those memories for our guests that come to visit. We are a third generation business, as I said, so the second and third are actively working in the business right now. My aunt and my father are in the second generation that are involved, and my cousin and I are the two third generation members. The nice thing is that we all own our own operating companies, so we get to run our businesses the way we want to, and then we come together on the real estate side. Second generation still owns all the real estate, and we work well together to decide what projects will get done, how we'll finance those, and who's paying for what. And so we come together for those things, but we also have very different leadership styles, so we're able to kind of put those on display without stepping on each other's toes too often, which is nice. We see about 800,000 visitors each year in a non-COVID year, and just really enjoy being in the hospitality business and everything that goes along with it.
Thank you, Michelle. Anybody who's not been to the village, it is an experience, whether for both young and old. My kids went there with school projects and did different things at the different places. And as an adult, it's great to go out there. It is quite the complex that the family has put together. So,
thanks, John.
And Michelle also keeps herself busy in some other ways, including chairing the Lancaster Chamber. So thank you for all you do with that.
Thank you.
Rich, why don't we turn to you?
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I am Richard Doherty. I'm the president of Lab Repco. We have a laboratory equipment distribution business that focuses primarily in biomedical research. Our main customers would be obviously NIH, CDC, all the major medical schools, Big Pharma, Merck, Glaxo, et cetera, and then of course the biotech community. We have 55 people in the organization. We're 40 plus years old and are based in Horsham, PA.
Steve, why don't we turn to you?
Sure. Thank you, John. As John said, I'm Steve Stagatis with Kreischer Miller. We are one of the largest locally based accounting firms in the greater Philadelphia region. With over 200 people, we focus a great deal of our efforts on privately held businesses, many of which are family owned. We do the things you would expect a public accounting firm of our size to handle in the way of audits and taxes. What I will say is that as our clients have grown, we have expanded our capabilities with them in areas of business transition, valuation, M&A, and due diligence matters. My role at the firm is running a practice group that integrates accounting, tax, and advisory services for the small to mid-market sized companies, and I am heavily involved in our family business practice. As a result, I spend a fair amount of my time working with owners and the next generation of family businesses in evaluating and structuring family transitions, work on business valuation, shareholder agreements, and have assisted clients with evaluating business acquisitions or helping them get ready for a third-party sale.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Just a minute of myself. I'm a partner at Barley Snyder. Barley Snyder is a regional law firm with offices in Pennsylvania and Maryland. We have over 100 attorneys. We are a full service law firm, including mergers and acquisitions, business, corporate, employment, real estate, and all the other areas you'd expect at a large law firm. My practice is primarily in two areas. One, I do a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And just as Steve described, I also do a lot of work with family-controlled businesses and closely held businesses. Those are a lot of different things within that category, including a lot of succession planning, working with family councils, developing family councils and family policies. Unfortunately, every once in a while, working through disputes in families as sometimes occur. So thank you to the panel. As you've heard, we've got some great experience and some variety in our panel. So what I'll be doing is I'll be asking the panel a couple of questions to talk about a few different things, and hopefully we'll have a conversation going with them. At the end, we'll have about 10 minutes for audience questions. And after that, we'll have about 20 minutes in a private chat room that people can continue the conversation with panel members if they'd like. So let's get started with some questions. And Michelle, I'm going to start with you. And, you know, we're talking about family-controlled businesses and what's next for those family businesses. So I'm going to start actually just slightly off topic. The 500-pound elephant in all of our world right now is COVID-19 and what's been happening with COVID-19 and how that's affected us all. Certainly affected all businesses, including family businesses. Michelle, you're a business that's a big crowd business. You want big crowds going through your village. You want the businesses around you that are live entertainment venues. You want them busy on weekends and people coming to their events and then to your events. COVID-19 hits and crowds are a bad thing. How did you react and what are you looking at moving forward?
Yeah, so for a pandemic, the industries you don't want to be in were food service and retail.
Yep.
We're in both of those. So the only one we're not in is the entertainment. But like you said, a lot of our partners in the county are, and we rely on them to be open and attracting guests that we all get to share then. So it has been, it's not over yet. It's been a very challenging year to say the least. And something that I hope we never have to live through again. I hope we're coming out the other end of this thing. But I'll tell you that throughout the whole thing, our mantra's kind of been, okay, what is the silver lining in this part? And what are we learning and what are we going to do differently because of this? And COVID has really allowed us to, I mean, we were shut down for 2.5 months, not able to open. And we pretty much hit the reset button. And when you're in business for over, 60 years, you don't realize how many processes and how many things have been layered on top of another layer on top of another layer. And you don't realize kind of how complicated you make things. And stripping all of that away, we've really been able to say, okay, do we really need to keep doing this? And is there a better way to do this? And so we've been able to kind of take a deep breath on some things. We've become more efficient in a lot of areas. We have, reinvented events that we've been doing for a very long time because a lot of, what we do is create these traditions and these memories for families. And the last thing we wanted to do in the middle of this pandemic was create anything that would lead to more unhappiness or people feeling more stressed. So we try to take each event and say, how can we do this, and make it, COVID safe. And so we've been doing that, and people are appreciating it. They want out of their houses. They want to go places. They want to do things, but they want to make sure they're safe. And so we've really focused a lot of energy on that. Right now, our biggest concern is how we manage the crowds, because we are getting the crowds back. And in a normal year, it's just the way the fall is for us. But we really have to be careful with, how many people we're allowing in stores, how, the safety procedures have been in place since this all happened. And we were very cautious before this, but reminding our team that this thing is still real. We still need to make sure we're doing all the things that we were doing back in May, that we're doing it now. And everyone's just done an amazing job of readjusting to it. So it's a challenge. The other piece is that a lot of the stores that my dad and I own are food stores. And so we do a lot of sampling in those stores. And that all just went away completely when COVID hit. And we've slowly brought that back in ways that are appropriate for this time. We've heard from a lot of our guests that they appreciate the way that we've adjusted to that. And then we're also realizing that, right now we're saving a lot of money on samples and things that we thought we had to do in order to sell our products. And I think we're getting a pass from people right now in not doing all the sampling we normally do. And we'll have to go back to some kind of middle ground, but I don't think we'll ever go back to the way we were before. And it's just been an interesting journey. Our biggest challenge is really the restaurant side. We have 2 restaurants, and I don't know what will happen over the next couple months. We've all been living with the outdoor seating, and when that goes away, that will add some additional stress on restaurants that really can't take much more. So that's probably our biggest challenge at this point, is just feeding the people who are coming, because we don't have enough seats for everybody inside.
It definitely has had an effect. And as you said, the closer you're to crowds or live entertainment, any of those things are just really challenges. And I think that's what we're seeing. It will change the way people are doing business in certain ways. So no doubt about that. Thank you, Michelle. Like I said, COVID, we just couldn't ignore COVID with where we are in the world right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Rich, I want to turn to you for a second, because and again, I just love some of the background and what you bring to this panel. So, Rich, you've had experience buying the company from the founder, selling the company to a third party, then unwinding the sale. Can you share from that experience? So you got to wear both the buyer and the seller hat. What would you have done differently, or thoughts on people going through that process?
Well, that's very nice. What I would recommend, not being in that situation where you had to unwind and start over, but back in 2004, I had an amazing mentor that gave me an opportunity to buy the company from him. And I led a management buyout of myself with 4 partners who operated the business up until 2014 together. In 2014, we had been doing a feasibility study for entering into an ESOP. And out of the blue, we got a solicitation from probably one of the larger players in our business. It certainly was very flattering. And we went through that process and actually did a third-party sale. And that didn't work out so well. In 2 months, we did a rescission, and we ended up buying the company back. So certainly probably the lessons learned during that process on the buy side, it was fantastic. We had a 20-year horizon to work with. 10 years were planning on the founder's departure. And then the next 10 years were myself and the leadership team growing the business. So I wouldn't have done anything different there. I think what worked out so well for us was that we had really kept our egos in check. It wasn't about the last penny. It was really about, for the betterment of the company, what we can do to have him retire, and at the same time us take over the company and have the necessary funds to grow it, et cetera. So that was perfect. On the sell side, the third party sell side, we were comparing that to the ESOP, and we had the very odd experience of taking both kind of down the aisle and trying to make a pick which way we wanted to go. And we were leaning towards the ESOP most of that time. But as we got closer and deeper into it, the more we said no, the higher the price went. And if I had to do it again, I probably would have focused more on fit than I did on the last dollar. I was very interested in the size of the transaction, the multiples, those things that I thought were extremely important. And I didn't realize the company was a venture capital based company that was going through an IPO. And after we got so far into it, did they let us know they were going through an IPO? And as it turned out, it was pretty evident that we were not a good match. We were the classical small family business. We had this really complementary culture, and then joining a $5 billion enterprise, we just were a fish out of water. So, thank goodness we were able to rewind that. The other thing I think is important to note for those that may be considering a third-party sale, most entrepreneurs and people that have family businesses, they do lean in, they ask for a commitment from their people. And part of that commitment, when you do a third-party sale, is seen as a betrayal. And as a seller, I really had a hard time with that, the guilt and that process. And I think that made me even more interested in wanting to buy the company back and taking it to a different place. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I hope.
Thank you, Steve. It does point out, though, dollars are important, but they're not the only thing that you need to be considering when you're going through that process or looking at going through that process. No doubt about that. So, Steve, you like me, you're a professional, so the advantage of that is we get to see lots of different businesses, lots of different families, lots of different transactions, and we get to see good things when they go well, and we get to see bad things when they don't go well. And it really allows us to bring things to transactions and allow people to know what options are available, what risks are there. So, you've watched a lot of generational transitions. You've been involved in a lot of them. Tell us a little bit about what you see as some common missteps in those processes.
Yeah, sure. Well, like I said, one of the biggest missteps I see, especially with family businesses, is they don't spend enough upfront time, if any, in trying to understand what each party wants. I've seen so many transactions go something along the lines of the senior generation is finally ready to exit the business, and we get a call asking, how do we do it? They want to jump right into the structure. Do we gift? Do we sell? Do we use deferred compensation? And that really is the wrong approach. Understanding that each structure accomplishes a specific objective. So for instance, gifting works especially well when you want a transaction that's relatively simple. The senior generation doesn't need any cash flow. You want to be highly tax efficient, and you don't care about whether the next generation needs to pay something for the business or not. On the flip side, when you have a next generation that has not been able to build up enough liquidity outside of the company, they may require something along the lines of a larger down payment or an ongoing series of payments. And in that case, gifting just doesn't help you achieve any of those objectives. So this is where I find it's best to slow down, get some more clarity on what the overriding goals and objectives are for both the senior and next generation. Otherwise, you end up seeing one party spending a lot of time and effort putting together a plan that's based on a lot of assumptions, and then they're surprised when there's reservations about moving forward with the transition. Keep in mind, family transition planning, it is a process. There are a lot of elements, and it really does take time, on years, in fact, to do it right. The other big item I see is a gap between wanting to transition to family, but not doing enough work to develop that next generation to do so. So we conduct the family business survey about once every 3 years. Our most recent one we did last year in 2019. So I just wanted to share a few of the results that I think tie directly into the comment I have. First thing was, over 80% of the families that had a succession plan in place had identified family as part of that next generation, as part of that succession plan. And of the families that did not have a succession plan in place, one of the questions we asked them was, well, what's holding them up? And just over a third stated that the big reason was the readiness of that next generation. One of the other things we polled them on was their emergency plans. And over 60% of families that did have emergency plans, so what happens in the event that the senior generation is all of a sudden unable to work, said that their plans include having family run the business. While the families that did not have an emergency plan, just under 50% said that they thought family would just step in and run it. Yet when we asked families how many of them have a formal development plan for the next generation, just 36%, right? So think about that. Family businesses lean so heavily towards wanting and planning the business to continue within the family, but do very little in the way of supporting the growth and development of that next generation. So.
Thank you, Steve. Michelle, as Steve was talking about, of just generational changes, that succession is just one of the things that makes the difference between a family-controlled business and a non-family controlled business. But there are a lot of issues that arise when you're in the business with brothers and sisters or cousins that you shared the Thanksgiving table with as kids. So without saying anything that's going to get you in trouble with the family, what are some of the more large challenges you've run into as being part of a family business, and how did you take them on?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, or I don't think any of us would be doing this, because business is hard enough, and then you throw family in it, and it makes it even more complicated. But for the most part, we're really fortunate. I think where we started to see some issues or some challenges was when the second generation was becoming to a place where they weren't in alignment with the third generation as far as growth. And so they were maybe looking to transition out or slow down a little bit, maybe not looking to reinvest as much money into the company. And it posed some challenges for the third generation. My cousin is younger than I am, and so she's as eager to grow the company as I am, and build new stores and renovate stores. And, all of that requires the approval of the real estate to do that. And that's owned by the second generation. So there are some challenges, and how do we work around those things? And we just really had to get creative with, okay, here's what we want. We understand where you are and what you want. And here's a way that we can maybe both get both things. And so we have a project that we were supposed to be starting at the end of this year. COVID has pushed it back a year for us, but we really came at it and said, okay, we want to continue to develop the village. They don't want to pull any additional cash out of the real estate. So my dad and I are actually going to fund the project. And in lieu of additional rent that's collected, that's how we will get paid back from the real estate. So and it's a store actually for my cousin. And so we're essentially the bank for her. The real estate doesn't have to take out the money. We're going to cover it and then look to get that money back from her over time. So it was a win-win for all of us. And, my uncle, who's not involved in the business anymore, but still owns the real estate, just kept saying, as long as I don't have to write any checks, I'm good. So I feel like we accomplished some things by being able to move forward because, from my cousin and my standpoint, we have a long way in this thing. We want to continue to see it grow. And we have about a 55% repeat rate that comes to the village. So we need to continue to show new things. We need to keep the village looking fresh. And while the second generation agrees with all of that, they're just done putting the money into it and are not quite at a place where they're ready to sell. So we just have to figure out a way to work around it. And, it leads to some frustrating conversations, but you'll get to a place that hopefully everybody can agree to. And we were there, and then COVID hit. And so now we're just delaying years. So anxious to get that project started.
Good, thank you. It doesn't solve everything, but good communications and understanding everybody's perspective helps a lot. Mm-hmm. So exactly as you guys took that on, no doubt about that. Rich, we talked a little bit about the wild ride you took and ending up with 100% ESOP. What words of wisdom would you have for somebody looking at ESOP or getting ready to go through that as an exit strategy?
Well, I think it's probably most important for everyone to understand is ESOP is just one of the choices. And for us, we thought and found that to be an ideal choice for us, but you really need a company that's healthy. You can't put a company into an ESOP that is not a healthy company, that has declining revenues. You need a company that has the right approach or the right attitudes towards it. And probably the advice that I would give is that when evaluating an ESOP versus some of the other choices, and part of my analysis was flawed the first time around, but I had the chance to do over, would be what are all the bites of the apple that you can get from an ESOP? And in addition to what I think is a fair price, it might not be top dollar, but it's going to be a fair price. You do have the opportunity for warrants. And in our case, we were able to get another 30% of the value of the company in warrants for some financing that we were doing for the company. The other thing you can do is you can earn shares back as a continued participant with the company, and you need that time. So as long as you don't want to leave the business right away and you have time, or at least you have a leadership team that can still be there if maybe the majority partner wanted to leave, but you still had the management team in place that you could continue. But probably the suggestion I would have is try to look at all the angles, because the ESOP has a lot of additional advantages that you don't see. And probably most importantly is that you technically still have most of the control of the business, or certainly the operation of the day-to-day activities of the business. And I think for most of it, that's really probably an important part of it.
Excellent. Thank you, Rich. Steve, a big part of succession planning is understanding the value of the business for various reasons. And certainly, I know you see it too, as well as I do. Sometimes owners who have worked in the business all their life don't really understand how to value that or what the value is. That's a challenge in itself. And then you throw COVID on it, where we've seen some businesses who have actually thrived in this environment, others who have been devastated, and then a group in the middle. How is that all what are you going to do with 2020 when you're valuing a business?
Right. Well, there's no doubt that COVID has had an impact on every business valuation to some degree. As we know, some industries have been hit a lot harder than others. But even still, we're still seeing a good degree of variability even within industries. For instance, we have seen some manufacturers that have thrived over the past few months because they were tied into PPE supply chains, where others that have made some efforts to come back, but will still continue to struggle. From a valuation perspective, keep in mind that the value of the company is trying to determine what its future cash flows are going to look like, and then placing a risk factor, otherwise known as a rate of return or a multiple to those cash flows. So when you're buying a business, you are buying it for what you are expecting it to generate in the future, not what has already happened. The challenge with that approach is that so many private companies are not great at forecasting the future for extended periods of time. And as such, historical performance often becomes a better proxy for predicting the future. However, we are seeing valuations that are starting to incorporate that discounted cash flow into the analysis, because in that model, you can forecast for at least a few years out and apply different discount rates to the years to account for the shorter term risks that the pandemic is having on a business. The other area that we are seeing in valuations is you're just taking a much harder look at those normalizing adjustments. So normalizing adjustments are already common practice when working on a valuation. They typically come in the form of two buckets: discretionary expenses or one-time events. And I think the impact of COVID would fall into that category of one-time events. Also taking a harder look at things like how the Paycheck Protection Program may have influenced cash flows, or halts on capital spending that may build up in future years, may have some pent up CapEx demand. So there are quite a bit of different factors to consider. I am not seeing, however, businesses taking massive discounts in value for what is currently perceived as more of an anomaly within the business cycle. So.
Steve, when we're talking about that, and I'm sure you've seen this in the buy-sell agreements of many of my clients, they push me sometimes with saying, John, we don't want to have to go to Steve and pay Steve to do evaluation for our business. We want to put a formula in here. Maybe it's a 3-year weighted average. Maybe it's something else. You mentioned the PPP loans. You mentioned some other things. What's your thought on the dangers of a formula when something like a COVID-19 hits?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, formulas are a more pragmatic approach to developing business valuations. I think depending upon the size and scale of a business, the formula can be an option. We do usually see that there is an opportunity, though, to make adjustments to that formula as needed, so that you can account for factors like these one-time unusual events, because it's very hard to put into those formulas anticipating all the different variables that could happen in any given year. Some approaches, we will see companies might have an actual valuation done maybe once every 3 years as sort of a validation of the formula that they have in the agreement. But certainly there's some balance there, and in a year like this, it would be hard to really take just the formula at its face value.
So it's come to the end of our time. So I would like to thank Michelle, Steve, and Rich. Thank you very much for your time and your insight. As I said, we are going to have about 10 minutes here. We'll take some questions from the audience and hear a little bit more from our panel. So again, thank you to the panel members, and thank you to the audience for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Surprisingly, our panel generated some great questions from our audience. So we're going to got about 10 minutes for questions. We're going to jump right into questions. And Michelle, I'm going to start off with you. One of the questions that came in, just recognizing what you talked about a little bit, challenging, among other challenges in a business when it's a family business, are those dynamics. Those dynamics themselves can be challenging. Then COVID seems to have gone through all our presentations. So the question really says, all right, COVID adds some additional pressure. How do you handle the family dynamics that are brought about by whether it's a COVID or some other crisis such as COVID?
I mean, I can speak from our standpoint that I think for anyone, we tend to take out our frustrations on our family, even if it has nothing to do with them. So who are the people that we blame for things or, can just release some stress? So that's, I think, a reality we all just have to understand exists. But, throughout this process, the communication and making sure it was the first time ever since I've been back in the business, which has been about 20 years, where we haven't all been in the same place. We can't really work remotely. We all need to be there. So it was making sure we could keep the communication going even during that period when we were shut down. And, you needed one person to really drive the process, but I wanted to make sure throughout that the family was all on the same page with what we were doing, the processes that were being put in place, the safety procedures, everything so that, we really could appear as a unified front in front of the employees. And, luckily there was, things were changing so rapidly that I have a lot of my family trust some of the decisions that I was making so that wasn't an issue. But I think you just can't say it enough. The more you can over communicate and keep everybody on the same page just takes away some of that tension of, an announcement coming out without somebody else knowing that announcement was going to come out. But then also realize that the tension is normal and that feeling is normal. And you sometimes take things out on the ones that you love and you don't really mean to do it. And it's okay to say you're sorry afterwards and hopefully move on. My poor dad he got it a few times throughout this where I go in his office, I shut the door and, I just need to release. And luckily he's there for me to be able to do that, and also understands I'm not taking that on him.
I think that's sometimes the email we type and then feel really good and then delete it and don't send it, is that same case. But I was going to comment, and you hit it, Michelle, the communications. I'm such a proponent of communications, especially in a family business. And that means even when there's a tough discussion, having that discussion, it's a whole lot better to have it and get through it. So I think during a crisis, communication is even more important. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, I suspect maybe it was a friend that sent it in, because we got a question in, and it almost sounds like it's a question being asked to a president with 10 different parts to it. I'll try to boil that down a little bit, but you talked about succession planning, the importance of it, and really kind of the first part of the question kind of goes, how do you get that process started? How do you get it going? What gets it momentum going?
Right. Well, thank you. Well, Michelle, kudos to you because it sounds like you have some really healthy family dynamics. And I think that really matters a lot from an advisor perspective. When you are starting to work with a family, it's really hard to move things forward if there's not some alignment between the different amongst the family group. So I usually say, as to answer part of that question, we tend to work with some other family advisors that are really focused on the psychology piece and helping to facilitate and promote those conversations. I took a Psych 101 class. My dad was a child psychologist growing up, but that's the extent of it. I just play one on TV. But a lot of times when it starts getting pretty heavy, I think it's important to pull in some resources from others that are accustomed to facilitating some of the more difficult conversations.
Yeah, and again, as I said, Steve and I, we get to sit in the seats where we see a lot of different families and a lot of different businesses go through these things. So that's one of the advantages we bring, or different vantage points from it. And I certainly agree with what Steve said. And going back to sort of how do you get these processes started? They are difficult processes to start, and I say sometimes they're difficult because of the soft side things. It's not the economics that does it, but it's the current generation saying, well, if I start talking about succession and leaving, what's next for me? Is this the end? It comes down to, hey, if I'm gonna retire, do we really have enough money set aside? How long am I gonna live? Is my health gonna be okay? Those are the challenging soft side questions that you need to take on so you can get a good process started. And they're challenging. I did a seminar several years ago where I played David Letterman and did the top 10 reasons why succession planning doesn't move forward. And it was really almost all the soft sided things, the psychology and the emotional piece of it to move forward. So we got a question in. I'm gonna start off, but I'm gonna certainly ask if Michelle or Rich have any experience in it, or Steve's probably seen too. The question was really so after a succession or after a sale, should you be looking at a family office or a family trust? Two very different things, and I'll start off giving a really good lawyer answer. It depends, and it depends on a lot of different things. What you want to do, what you're trying to accomplish, what you got from the result of the liquidity event. We have a lot of families here, where in the Central Pennsylvania region, that love to give back. We see sometimes we see trusts set up, whether for scholarships or other things that are in the hearts of the former owners. We often see those types of things set up. We see family offices. We always talk about, does the family own a business, or is the family an entrepreneurial family that just loves owning businesses and not necessarily the one they're in? So in that case, a family office may be a perfect place to put their investment dollars and figure out whether they're going to help the next generation do something, or whether they're going to do something out in the world. So family trusts and family offices are great. They should always be part of a conversation during an exit event. They're going to be right for some people and not right for others. Steve, I don't know if you've seen use of them much, or have other thoughts.
Yeah, no, I would say our experience has been pretty similar. Usually, we see family offices start to morph themselves when there's a certain amount of liquidity that's available to reinvest and deploy into other forms of assets. So for some smaller businesses that may have a liquidity event, it might just be a little more practical for them to invest into more of like a marketable security type approach, or start a new business themselves. But we do have a handful of clients that do operate a family office, but it's usually there's a certain amount of wealth behind that to make it work effectively.
So. I think we have about 2 minutes, so I'm going to try and get one more in. Rich, through your ESOP, one of the interesting things are, I think you've got some family members from the previous that are now back in the business and working there. And it sort of raises two different sides of that. One, just the legal side of those former owners in an ESOP, but also does it bring a different dynamic to operating the business when you've got some legacy people involved?
Yeah, I would say that it does, but it also it refers back to the previous questions. There's also some wealth transfer opportunities as part of an ESOP. We were fortunate enough to get warrants, which was roughly 30% of the transaction, but that's based on future value of the business 10 years forward. So what that gave us an opportunity to do is kind of have some wealth transfer, estate planning, where we were able to transfer those warrants into a trust. So we established a grantor trust, and those warrants were allocated to each of my children. And the hope is that 10 years forward, the value of those are significantly more than what they were when we put them in the trust. So we paid the capital gains, which was only minuscule of what they will be at some point in the future. And then it does allow us to basically transfer wealth by putting in a grantor trust by absorbing the tax capital gains at that point when they would become due. So, like I said, there's a lot of different bites of the apple, and it does give you that flexibility.
Excellent, thanks. I think we're out of time for questions. We're going to switch over. For anybody who wants to continue these conversations, we'll meet you in the networking room. So thank you again to my panel.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.